Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Jessica Bowser. She is the host of a podcast called Virginia Outdoor Adventures. She's also a brand new master hiker, having completed a program that many of you may not have been aware of that is sponsored through the Virginia Park System. So, welcome, Jessica, master hiker, to share with us about how you got interested in hiking all 39 parks here in the Commonwealth of Virginia and sort of the genesis of hosting a podcast to sort of share your love of the outdoors with people all over the Commonwealth.
Well, thank you for having me, Catherine. The way this whole thing got started is I was actually fortunate enough as a child to grow up in a safe community with a lot of outdoor space. And so I spent a lot of my childhood outdoors. And then when I moved to Northern Virginia, I started seeking out new places where I could spend time outdoors. And one of the places nearby is Mason Neck State Park, which is part of the Virginia State Park System. And it is such a gem over there in Lorton on the Mason Neck Peninsula. I remember finding it and thinking, how did I not know that this was here sooner? It is a gorgeous place and what I like to call the best place to catch a sunset in Northern Virginia, as well as so many other outdoor spaces on that peninsula. And so it's really an awesome place that we have right here in Northern Virginia that we can all enjoy. But the way I started in this journey to visit all of the Virginia state parks was back in 2015. I was traveling around the state quite a bit at that time, and I would pass signs on the interstate for different state parks all around the state. And so out of curiosity, I would pull over when I had time and I would just sort of check out what these other state parks were like. And I was really impressed with what I found. Just really great outdoor spaces with fantastic amenities and wonderful staff. And so I decided, why not make it a bucket list item to try to visit all of the state parks? And so I looked it up, and at that time, there were 36 Virginia state parks. There are now 38, and then there's a 39th park that was supposed to open this past spring, but due to COVID, they did not have their grand opening, but is still accessible to visitors, which is Seven Bend State Park. So there's 39 now, and I started visiting all of the parks and checking them off, and it was a bit of a long journey, but I really wanted to enjoy every bit of it, and so I made sure that I spent a good amount of time in each park, and just recently completed that in Appomattox at Holiday Lake State Park just this past week.
So there is an actual program that started in 2010, which I didn't realize was the case until I read the article that just appeared this week in the Connection newspapers about your having attained the Master Hiker certification. And it's called the Trail Quest program. And apparently people can go online and actually sign up to take part in this. It's an official sort of thing. And you're one of a small number of people that's actually registered with the program, checked off all the boxes so that you get what we can see behind you is your Master Hiker certificate. So tell us a little bit about this program we've never heard of.
That's correct, Catherine. So the Trail Quest program is available through Virginia State Parks. And if you visit their website and just search for Trail Quest, it'll take you to the page where you can sign up. And what you do is every time you visit a state park and you hike or do another activity that you enjoy, you then go onto their website and you enter that information, which is just which park you visited and the date that you visited. And so the website will keep track for you. And then as you reach certain milestones, they will send you pins in the mail, which are really cool. So you get a pin for your first state park visit. You also get one for 5 parks, 10 parks, 20 parks. And then when you complete them all, you get the Master Hiker pin.
And that makes it more of I guess it's like the gamification of hiking. Gamification has become like a term in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, Pokemon Go and all the things people do to kind of log, badges on your Fitbit when so it's not a surprise really, or it shouldn't be a surprise that they've sort of made a game of this, and they reward you, which is the whole point of badges. They reward you to encourage you to keep doing more and doing more and doing more until you've done them all.
Well, and I think that's the idea, is to encourage people to visit parks outside of the geographic area where they live. So, for instance, I had only visited Mason Neck and also Leesylvania, which is in Prince William County. But then when I started to realize that there were other parks in the around the state that I could visit, then I got curious. And it wasn't just the parks that I got to visit, but Virginia has so many really great small cities and small towns, and there is so much to do even outside the parks. And so it's a great way to make a great weekend trip out of it, or if you want to take a vacation, and you can plan to visit several state parks and also some of these other areas and features and attractions around Virginia. So there's a lot to do, and so it's a great way to encourage people to get out and explore in places they might not have explored before.
And you're right. I mean, people sometimes forget how big Virginia is. It's a huge state. And for those who don't get out of Northern Virginia, you may not be aware that there's actually very interesting things when you head south into Southwest Virginia. I know you said in the interview with the Connection newspapers that one of your favorite state parks, hard to pick a favorite, is the New River Valley Park, which is got a 57-mile trail. Like, who
That's
knew?
Yeah, that exactly. Who knew? There are actually two state parks that are trails, as opposed to what you typically think of with a park. And that is High Bridge Trail, which runs right through the adorable town of Farmville, and then New River Trail State Park down in Southwest. And I absolutely love New River Trail. You can walk it, hike it, ride your bike, horseback. You can even kayak because it runs parallel to the New River, which is where it gets its name. And so the center of that trail is called Foster Falls, and there's a horse stable there. But what is really great about the Foster Falls area, the park will actually provide a shuttle for you to either end of the trail, and then you can ride back to Foster Falls, which makes it really manageable because it's almost 58 miles, as you mentioned. That's a lot to do for several people in one day. So you could break it up into 2 days, and the park will drop you off at one end of the trail and you ride back towards the center. And then the next day you can do the same thing from the other side.
And you point out something interesting too about, there are small towns near some of these state parks, but there's also Skyline Drive. There's all kinds of things that connect the parks that are also very interesting. I mean, Skyline Drive is very slow. My husband once decided to try to do all of Skyline Drive, and but you can't go the speed you can on a highway. So you really have to be invested in going on the Skyline Drive. But Floyd, Virginia, for instance, is a beautiful little place that's right off Skyline Drive. And so in addition to the parks, I mean, people should really look at mapping out and taking advantage of all of these other things that are also outdoor adventures.
Absolutely. And if you go to the Virginia State Park website and you choose a park, there is a link on each park's page that says nearby attractions. And that'll help give you an idea of what there is to do. So, for example, Ferrystone State Park is not too far from Floyd, like you mentioned. And one of the things that's really neat about Ferrystone and where it got its name from is there's a search area where you can dig through the ground and the gravel to search for what are called fairy stones, which are actually like crystals in the ground that are formed in the shape of a cross. And there's a little legend that goes along with it. And I'll let your viewers look up what that legend is.
That's right. It's an adventure, and that's one of the few things that I think we can say that people can safely do in the time of pandemic and COVID. In fact, a lot of people have gone to national parks all over the country because you can be outside and you can be safely distanced from other people. And so it's something that I think more people should consider is how to plan an outdoor adventure that you can safely do, even though we are all living in a time of quarantine.
That is a really good point, Catherine. And in fact, the state parks have had record visitation since the pandemic has started. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are trying to get outside and they're looking for safe activities to do with the people that they live with. But also because so many other local parks and national parks closed, especially back in March and April when this pandemic sort of got started. And it's really notable that Virginia State Parks managed to stay open and accessible to the public and to continue to provide that service for Virginians.
Well, go us. Now I'm really proud. So
Right.
what about things like campgrounds? So again, not being an outdoor adventurous person the way you are, Jessica, although I do follow you on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all the places, so I see where you go. But things like camping and another thing is RVs. I can't tell you the number of friends of ours who have purchased RVs and are traveling around in their RV from place to place. So is that just another way of kind of mapping out a possible outdoor adventure is to consider campgrounds and RVs?
Absolutely. Most Virginia state parks have either a campground or cabins, not all of them. So you do want to make sure that you get online and look before you start making those plans. But what's really neat is some of the original Virginia state parks that were opened in the 1930s have cabins that were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. And so if you're looking for a little bit of history as part of your experience, I would recommend renting one of those cabins. But there are also many modern cabins that have been added since then that are at many of the parks. And the cabins are, fully accessible, and they have, bedrooms and a kitchen and wraparound decks and a fireplace. And so they're really, they're just a fun place to stay. And then also there are something called yurts, which some of the parks have added. And if you're not familiar with a yurt, it's sort of like a cross between a cabin and a tent. It has furniture, your standard furniture, like a bed and table and upholstered chairs, but there is no plumbing. So you're not going to have an indoor bathroom or a kitchen. You would share a bathroom on the campground. And then these yurts are constructed on top of what looks like a deck. So you have, it's elevated off the ground just slightly. Usually they're near or on the campground. I've heard that some of the parks, like I believe First Landing State Parks, has yurts on the beach, which is an experience that I have yet to have, but I'm hoping to do that in the near future.
Well, I don't know how anybody can listen to this and not be inspired to immediately go to the state park website and go, okay, what is near me that has a yurt or campgrounds or cabins, historic cabins? Because, I think for a lot of us, and I am one of them, it's just this is not my go-to. When I think about traveling, I've traveled, but now we're in a pandemic and we all need to think differently about traveling and taking advantage of what's right outside our door. And I might add, supported by our tax dollars, right? So if you live in Virginia, yes, take advantage of what you've already paid for. When we come back from our break, I do want to talk about your podcast and what you are doing and the guests that you are having and how you're helping your listeners to understand the many, many ways in which you can bike and hike and fish your way to nirvana here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So everyone stay tuned. We are not done yet with Jessica Bowser, who is the host of Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast.
Hey, chat. Why do I wear a mask? Because when I'm not behind the screen, my mask is my cheat code. And when we stop the spread, we level up. What's the next level? Hanging with friends again. You're right, masks have always been a part of our community. I miss you guys too. Being face-to-face is truly the next level. Here's the cheat code. Stop the spread of corona. Mask up, America.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Good one, son.
Last summer, my new dad took me on vacation. First, we went deep sea fishing.
Wow! I'm so proud of you, son.
And then we went on Thunder Shark. That was awesome! Let's go again. 3 times. I gotta say, it was pretty cool.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. And wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And today we are talking with Jessica Bowser. She is the host of a new podcast called Virginia Outdoor Adventures. And what we're talking about today is Virginia State Parks. She is just attained a certificate of master hiker, having hiked all 39 Virginia State Parks. But I want to talk in this segment a little bit about your podcast and the kinds of guests that you're having on your podcast and what you really want people to understand about the many, many ways that people can take advantage of these public spaces.
Sure, Catherine. Well, the way the podcast got started was actually through my journey of visiting all the Virginia State Parks. As I was traveling around the state, I was posting photos and information about what I was doing on all my social media channels. And I'm a former fourth grade teacher, and so it's important to me, and maybe part of my nature, no pun intended, to share as much information as possible about where I'm going and what I'm doing, because I really want other people to be able to have that same experience as well. And so as I was posting all of this information on social media, my friends were saying to me, you know, you really should think about starting a blog or writing a book or doing something to share all this great information. And I thought, yeah, sure, that sounds like a great idea, but who really has time? Well, during this pandemic, guess what? I have a whole lot of extra time on my hands. And so I started a podcast. It's called Virginia Outdoor Adventures. And in the podcast, I have guests that come on the show to talk about different outdoor experiences and places, but also to talk about the ways that people connect with the outdoors right here in Virginia.
Right. And there's a lot of ways. You mentioned kayaking earlier, but there are people who want to cycle all through Virginia. And there are ways to do that. I don't know them, but there are ways to do that. And so some of your guests are really kind of opening the door to how people can better explore, whether it's by boat or IV or on foot or on bicycles, all of the public spaces that we have in Virginia. And again, provided by our tax dollars. And I have to say, I think Virginia does a wonderful job of creating and maintaining excellent public parks for the benefit of everybody who lives here. So if you're not out there taking advantage of it, you only have yourself to blame. But Jessica is going to give you a roadmap, and not just through her podcast, because you are a wonderful photographer, and you and I have been connected on social media for a long time. And what you post on your Instagram account or on Twitter or on Facebook are amazing photographs, and not just of the vistas of the parks, but of wildlife. So you're actually, in my mind, a very accomplished birder. You know a lot about birds and different varieties of birds. You are my go-to expert for what is this bird, Jessica?
Well, Catherine, personally for me, when I go to the outdoors, it helps for me to connect with the outdoors and to be closer to the experience when I am interacting with the outdoors. And so what that means to me is observing wildlife, knowing what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, being able to identify different plants and trees and mushrooms, for example. And so I try to learn as much as I can about the outdoors, and then I enjoy sharing that with other people as well. And so that's what I do as part of the podcast, and also what I do on my social media is I try to make all of my information that I post so that if you were not there with me, you might have some idea of what I experienced, because you're not going to just see the vista, and you're probably not going to see too many selfies, maybe one or two, but you're going to see sort of the big picture, and then you're also going to see the details of what I did. So you might get a big wide picture of a gorgeous vista, but then you're also going to get some close-ups of mushrooms and leaves and whatever else I might find on my hike.
Well, I'm sorry I did not wax eloquent over your mushroom pictures. Okay, maybe I'm just drawn to birds naturally. But I did have a situation where there was a bird in my backyard, which I took a picture of. And then I messaged Jessica, and I'm like, Jessica, what is this big, magnificent looking bird? And it turns out it's a Cooper's hawk, which I'd never seen one in person, much less in my backyard. But you also gave me very important information about why I should care about the birds hanging around my bird feeders. So, you know, I think maybe it's because you're a former teacher. You really have amassed a lot of knowledge, in addition to the fact that you're an excellent photographer and you do a great job documenting what you're seeing and where you are. You really have a lot of knowledge about the outdoors.
Well, Catherine, I also do a lot of conservation advocacy work on the side, and it helps to know what it is that you're conserving. And part of doing advocacy work is being able to tell the story of Virginia and the outdoors and why it's so important to conserve it. And so part of that story is being able to share those experiences.
And we haven't heard a lot about Save the Owl campaigns. I mean, once upon a time, conservation, that's what it meant to people, is like, oh, there's people who are, sitting in trees trying to save owls. But it's more than that. It's more than just owls too, it's plants. And I know here in Northern Virginia, there's a tremendous effort to get volunteers to help with invasive species of plants, taking them out of waterways and where invasive species are choking out native plants. And then there's a whole movement about planting native plants, and so tell us a little of those resources. I don't think a lot of people know that they exist.
Well, Catherine, a lot of organizations around Virginia have been working on these issues for a really long time. But if somebody is interested in getting involved, one of the great things that they can do is go to their local state park and see if that park has a friends group. Not all the state parks, but most of the state parks do have a friends group. So, for example, I'm a member of the Friends of Mason Neck. But also there's an umbrella organization called the Virginia Association for Parks, and that includes all of the state parks as well as national parks and some national forests, I believe. And what that group does is it focuses on working with the General Assembly to ensure that we have the funding that we need for the parks. And so that funding goes towards amenities and staff, but it also goes towards some of these conservation programs as well. And if you join your local friends group, then you can get involved right in your own backyard with helping to control invasive species, bringing educational programs to the public, hosting events that will raise money for your park, and also talking to your legislators to raise awareness for what the park's needs are and how the parks service all of Virginians.
Right. And if you have really plugged in friends, they also help you. When I was planting things in my yard and posting pictures of like my landscaping efforts, people are like, why are you planting a Japanese maple? Because you should be planting native Virginia plants. And they're absolutely right about that. And I have plants natives, and there's resources online that you can print out that will tell you what is native to Virginia, so that you know that you're planting things that are indigenous to this area in whatever part of that you're in. But I just think it's raising awareness, and I think that one of the benefits of your podcast is going to be raising people's awareness about things that we don't sit around thinking about very often. So what are some of that you've got coming up?
Well, we just completed an episode, just released an episode the other day with the executive director of Gunston Hall, Scott Stroh, and it was a wonderful conversation. In fact, Scott invited me over to Gunston Hall, and we spent half a day walking around the Mason Neck Peninsula together and talking about the really rich history of the area, of the indigenous people there, of the enslaved people there, of people like George Mason himself and their family, and sort of the industry that grew around that area, and talking about how people interacted with the landscape throughout history, and the role that Gunston Hall and Mason Neck State Park and the other land areas and natural areas there, how they work together to conserve that area today, how they work together to educate the public about conservation, and also educate the public about the history, the really rich history of the area. But also they ensure access to the outdoors for all. They are really focused on ensuring that Gunston Hall and the surrounding area is a place that is community centered, and a place where people can go to have easy access to trails and to the water, and to be able to experience the outdoors. So that's one example of a podcast episode that hopefully your viewers will enjoy.
Well, and I'm glad it's Gunston Hall. I haven't been there in years, but as a graduate of George Mason University, I think we had a banquet there one year when I was a student, and that it is a venue. I mean, Gunston Hall has been a venue for things like receptions or other kinds of events. But the history of George Mason is very interesting, and I'm fascinated and heartened by the fact that a lot of these former plantations or colonial homes are starting to talk more about the enslaved people and the role of enslaved people and their stories. There are graveyards everywhere all over Virginia that have not been discovered. There's foundations for cabins that are still to be unearthed. And so I think that's an important part along when you talk about outdoor adventures, because Virginia is one of the original 13 colonies. We have a lot of historical sites here, again, in addition to state parks. But sometimes these historical plantations or colonial homes are near a state park. And sometimes there is state support of maintaining these so that they are open to the public, or there are foundations that run them. And so, I think you're doing a tremendous service simply by having a podcast that talks about outdoor adventures and that touches on how there's intersectionality between the history of Virginia, the other resources in addition to the state parks, and how people can take advantage of all of them at once.
Absolutely. And, we are so fortunate here in Virginia to have such a diverse and beautiful landscape. And when you really think about the history of Virginia, the landscape here shaped the history of Virginia. And the history of Virginia in a lot of ways is the foundation for the history of the United States. And so one example of that, for instance, was when the colonists first landed at Jamestown, they eventually needed to start moving inland. And they needed to do that for protection. They needed to do that to get away from the swamps where the mosquitoes were causing a lot of disease. And so they started moving up the James River. And they probably would have continued to move up the James River, but they reached the fall line. And the fall line is a natural area where the land sort of drops. It goes from the Piedmont, sort of the hilly, rocky Piedmont area, to the sandy Eastern Shore area. And so there's waterfalls there, and they couldn't get their ship up the fall line, and that's where they had to stop. So Richmond wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for that intersection of history and geography here in Virginia.
That's one of the most interesting pieces of information I've ever heard, Jessica. And so,
well, I'm a former fourth grade teacher, so I've got lots of those.
Keep teaching us. And I want to encourage everybody to look for the podcast, any place that you find your podcast, whether that's TuneIn or Spotify or your podcast app, but look for the Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast. Jessica Bowser is the host, and you will learn a lot about the outdoor spaces here and also how you can take advantage of them, because this is what you need to know. Thank you, Jessica, so much for being with us.
Thank you, Catherine.